David Futransky, Senior Director of Institutional Advancement and a member of the class of ETHS 1969, welcoming you to our 8th edition of Coming Together. Today we take a look at the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps was established in 1961 by an executive order from President John Kennedy. In doing a little bit of my research, I discovered that one of the key people in Congress to support the funding for the Peace Corps was probably the last person anybody would have expected. The Congresswoman from Evanston, Marguerite Stitch Church, a noted conservative, was very much in favor of the Peace Corps, of helping and reaching out and connecting to people in parts of the world. And she led the Republicans to join in a bipartisan support of funding the Peace Corps in 1961. Just a little Evanston side note. We have 4 volunteers coming back to talk with us, and we have in our office in the Institutional Advancement, the ETHS Foundation office, Karen Jones, who's not an ETHS alum, but is an alumni of the Peace Corps. And Karen's going to moderate today's panel and introduce us to our group. So Karen, it's all yours.
As you may know, this year we're celebrating 60 years of the Peace Corps. My name is Karen Jones, and I work in the Alumni and Foundation office with David Futransky, and I served in China from 2011 to 2013. So this month it'll be exactly 10 years since my service, which was the 50th anniversary. So if you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourself, we'll start with Gabby.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby. I am an alumni. I graduated from ETHS in 2013 and served in the Peace Corps in Madagascar from 2018 to 2020 up until we were evacuated due to the pandemic.
I want to hear a little bit more about that, how that went. Let's go to you, Jay.
All right. I was one of the first Peace Corps volunteers. I volunteered in 1962 and was in the 3rd group to Malaya, as it was called then, now Malaysia, and finished in 64.
Frances, go ahead.
I am Frances. Eagan was my maiden name when I was at ETHS. I graduated in 1968. And then I was in the Peace Corps from 1979 to 1981 and serving in Jamaica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Blair. I graduated from Evanston in 2012, and I served in northern Ghana from 2018 to 2020, similar to Gabby. But I actually just finished my service regularly, like right as we were evacuated. So I got very lucky.
Jay, why don't you go ahead since you started. What was your role? What was your assignment in Malaya?
I'm an architect, and I had just received my Master's of Architecture degree with a thesis on design of housing for developing nations. And while doing my graduate work, I applied for the Peace Corps, and they accepted me. And my thesis, the program started 2 weeks before my thesis was due. My thesis advisor said, "You'll learn much more in Malaysia. We'll let you go a week early from your give you a week less, and you can go a week earlier to the Peace Corps." So I arrived a week late to my language programs and everything else, but And my assignment there was to teach architecture at a technical college in Kuala Lumpur. It was the only place in Malaya at the time that taught architecture. And I taught in the 3rd year of architecture with a group of Peace Corps volunteers that were experts in all kinds of structural engineering, electronics, all sorts of things. And we together put together a satellite tracking station, which was one of maybe 6 or 8 in the world at the time. Got it in operation with a gun mount that was given by the U.S. Navy. And got it built. But I also did design housing for rural development at that time. So it was a multitask job.
That's really cool. Were you the first group in Malaysia?
No, we were the third group. There were
third
two ahead of us. The Peace Corps was a year old when I joined, and already there had been two groups there. It was a very successful program.
Gabby, what about you? What was your assignment?
So I was a community health advisor. This had many roles. For the most part, I lived right by the community clinic. So I would spend a lot of my time working there with the nurses and the midwives. So we do prenatal visits, vaccines, education seminars with mothers. And then most of my time was spent out in the field. So I lived in a commune with about 11,000 people. But within the larger commune, there were 7 different communities that I would travel to with other community volunteers, but that were local to the community. So they were actually like country host nationals. So I would travel with them, and we would form care groups with mothers just to teach them about hygiene and sanitation, nutrition, vaccines, and then they would go out and teach other community members about those topics. And then we would take part in national campaigns for vaccines, so like measles and polio. Those were huge. And teach mothers and community members about using mosquito nets. And of course, we'd also teach them about proper nutrition. So we'd try to come up with different recipes that were nutritious and affordable and accessible, and try to, teach different recipes or come up with different recipes that were accessible to most families. So yeah, it was just a culmination of a lot of different things, baby weighing, and then setting up consultations with doctors and being midwives. And then of course, as a Peace Corps volunteer, you kind of find your niche and sometimes work outside of your scope of practice. So I worked with a lot of teachers to build or help develop a girls group that was focused on self-esteem and sex education, hygiene for girls that started their menstrual cycles. So yeah, it was a lot of different things, I guess you could say.
I think that's pretty much how Peace Corps is.
Exactly.
You're doing one thing and then you do 100
Exactly.
others. So how much time did you have left before UCOS when you were evacuated?
I had been there for 25 months, so I only had 2 months left.
We're almost there.
Almost there. We had just finished our COS conference in February, and then we were evacuated in March. So we were very close.
Well, at least you were closer rather than farther. So
yeah.
The term of the Peace Corps is 2 years, but traditionally 2 years, and then with 3 months of training tacked on at the beginning. So it's 27 months. In my case, in China, it's more like 24 even because of the way that the program works. But for most people, it's 27 months. Frances, why don't you share with us what you did in Jamaica?
Well, I joined in 1979, and at that time, what they were doing to screen you to whether or not you were going to become chosen to be a volunteer was you had a cast. So I can't even remember what that acronym was for. So I don't know if they even do something similar to that. I had been inspired to become a volunteer. I had taken a 3.5-month backpacking trip through Central America. And at that time, when I was in Costa Rica, I met some Peace Corps volunteers, and they really inspired me to come back to the United States and apply. So, as I said, at that time, we had this cast, and we were all we flew into DC and then went to Cool Font, West Virginia, and literally we were there for the weekend, and at the end of the weekend, you were either chosen or not. So it was really awkward to go back to DC with everybody. And some people got shots and some people didn't. But anyway, I went to Jamaica. Of course, we did have training in in service in Kingston for some time, but mine was primarily nutrition and working on a project with Catholic Relief Services. So there were 2 volunteers teamed up to work in the nutrition. And the one volunteer was agriculture and the other one was the nutrition. So I worked specifically with the clinics in a very rural area. At that time in Jamaica, there was a lot of kwashiorkor and marasmus babies suffering from malnutrition because of inadequate food supplies, as well as the fact people were using formulas and then not properly sanitizing the bottles or mixing the formulas to the right concentration. So we were bagging up the European Economic Community's powdered milk to distribute at the clinics, and then work with the nurses in the clinics to develop posters and visual aids and messaging, really, to promote that breastfeeding was the best, because they had big billboards all over Jamaica at the time, breast is best, because they were trying to get people away from using the formula. So then the agricultural volunteer would encourage people to go to grow things in their backyard gardens, in containers or whatever, that would be nutritious, like spinach. Of course, they have callaloo, which is a green, but it was to grow vegetables in their gardens. And then we would go to their homes and do little demonstrations. We'd do a cooking demonstration, and I'd be there talking about nutrition, and the nurses would be there for the clinics and everything. It was a really wonderful time. And as an anecdote, 10 years, I met my husband in the Peace Corps, because he was the ag volunteer the second year of my service. And 10 years, so we got married sometime later, but 10 years later, we went back to Jamaica on vacation, and we went to Green Island, which is where I was served in the northwest side of the island. And I walked into the clinic in Green Island, and one of the nurses was there, and she said, "Oh my gosh, it's Miss Francis." And I was just amazed that after 10 years, I walk into the clinic and they still remember who I am. And that was something I've remembered to this day, how, they always said that the impact that Peace Corps has on you, and a lot of times you feel has more impact on you than it does on the people. So that was one of my takeaways. It really was an incredible experience.
That's really cool to hear. Is your program still, prior to 2020, is it still around?
Well, I happen to know Peace Corps is still there in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they were all evacuated. But I don't know if that particular program is still there. I know Catholic Relief Services is still very involved in international development. And then I'm thankful to say that my husband and I have inspired several people to join the Peace Corps. One person who served in Colombia for 3 years, and then is now working in the Peace Corps office in Washington, D.C., and she's got the Caribbean desk. Of course, she was one of the people that had to get everybody evacuated. So it was rough for her. And then
daunting.
And then another young person who was serving in the Peace Corps in Cameroon, in Central Africa. And of course, she was there when the whole evacuation. So I've seen it from the perspective of the person who had to really do the evacuations to one of the volunteers that got evacuated,
right?
Just like you both did,
right? And that application process that you described they've definitely changed it since then. That sounds kind of awful.
Terrible.
To get to DC and get your hopes up, and then I understand. You have now, I think, in recent years, they've definitely revamped their application to where you can kind of have a little bit of a little bit of a say in where you're going. That wasn't necessarily the case when I was applying, but anyway, Blair, why don't you go ahead and.
Cool. Yeah, that was definitely, we were definitely not in the cat or whatever you were explaining. I was like, nope, we all just kind of, I don't know what their process was, but definitely no one was sent home after we met in DC. But yeah, I was originally a community health facilitator. And kind of, yeah, honestly, when I got to my community, I think my role shifted a lot after we kind of did like the initial like needs assessment and just after I like the integration period, very Peace Corps lingo. But my role kind of moved to more like farming, gardening, food security. That's kind of a bigger emphasis, especially in the northern part of Ghana, because rain is a lot less common, and especially with like climate change, it's really affecting rain patterns and things like that. And so most of my projects were, we did a lot of like school gardening, and so students would like grow the food and then it would be used in like the school feeding program. So kind of multi-purpose, I guess. Another thing we did was like a large community, like dry season garden with a lot of different vegetables. And then the volunteer before me had started like a chicken coop, kind of like agribusiness project. And so my role was kind of to like when the volunteer before me first started it, it was kind of like a smaller scale, sort of like a test run, like how is this going to go? And so by the time I got there, we were able to expand it a little bit. And so it was kind of like a women's group, chicken or like poultry rearing type thing for eggs, for egg production. So they could like part of the eggs were used to sell. So like for income, and then part were just used for eating. Yeah. And most of my other things were a lot of like smaller projects. I think I had this idea before I joined. I don't know. I really don't know what I was thinking before I joined, but I was like, had this grand idea of what I was going to be doing. And I think I was very, I don't know, naive maybe. But yeah, most of my projects were a lot more just like community-based, smaller scale, working with like women's groups, working with youth groups at the school, or doing, like I lived in an area close to some other volunteers. So we would do kind of like grassroots soccer. So doing like malaria education, but using like soccer as a way to like make it fun. Or like doing some cooking demonstrations. Yeah, so kind of a hodgepodge of things for sure.
I think most people would probably share that sentiment of feeling a little naive before joining about how you're going to change the world, and I guess some people do. So I have to ask though, you were talking about chickens. Did you kill a chicken? Because that's kind of the a rite of passage.
Definitely. Although mostly it was guinea fowl. I got really good at, like when my parents came to visit, we were like, let's kill this guinea fowl. And they were like, wow, okay. So yeah. But I guess it's like, it was good to like be, I mean, if I'm gonna eat it, I might as well be connected to what I'm going to eat. So yeah. But that continues too.
Gabby, I saw you nodding your head. Have you also killed a chicken?
I have not killed it myself, but I've been around for a lot of chicken killings. Yes. Chickens, cows, pigs. Yeah.
Well, and to be clear, this would be, actually eating it after killing the chicken, but it's kind of a, didn't really happen so much in China, but I do know some people who did it just because it's like the Peace Corps rite of passage, I guess. So let's go back to you, Jay. What did you enjoy most about your service, and maybe what was one of the challenges that you?
I was in a very unusual Peace Corps location, being in the capital city, And all of the volunteers all over the country were eating, sheep's brains and rice and all sorts of things. And I had to go to the local. There was actually a root beer, an American root beer chain in Kuala Lumpur. So my life was to try to get out into the countryside and to meet the people. And I made friends. One of the other Peace Corps volunteers who was a nurse just to the south of Kuala Lumpur. So I spent my weekends going down there and being among the people just to be able to use my Malay, which is not used very much in the city, and to explore what the country was like. And that was was the greatest part of being a Peace Corps volunteer, to help out where I could and to help others, because we were really doing work that actually shouldn't have been done by Peace Corps. In fact, when I left the position, I recommended that we not fill it. But another architect came in and followed in my footsteps, taught at the college also. He was a very close friend of mine, and we stay in contact. And he traveled all across Asia for 6 months, like I did, following my footsteps. So from that standpoint, I think my value in the Peace Corps was mainly working with my students and having a close relationship with them. They had been studying under the British architectural guidelines, so they knew how to design a double-hung window. There wasn't one in all of Malaya. So I tried to teach by taking them out into the kampongs and the villages and showing them how the architecture there worked and how good it was. That basically the typical, I'll use Malaysia from now on, but the Malaysian house is built in a way that when we tested it, the wind actually speeds up. The speed of the air flows through it faster than the outside air is flowing. And it's about 5 to 10 degrees cooler than outside. And what we discovered was that it was a Venturi effect. The house was shaped wide at the ends and narrow in the middle, and the wind was swooped in through it and cooled everybody in the house and made it a wonderful place to live. Chinese housing, Indian housing came from northern climates that was totally inferior to a Malay house. So that part of it was very interesting to research into the traditions and to learn how the religion, although it was Islamic, had an underlayment of the primitive, animalistic, historic gods, goddesses, and the village that I stayed with to the south of Kuala Lumpur, I went up with my good friend on a hike to the top of the mountain, which was called Gunung Agung, which means the mountain of the king. And we had with us, we had a bomo, which is a witch doctor. And he led us up. We got to a ring of stones close to the top. And he said, now when you go through, do not kill any living thing. So we passed through with that warning. We got to the top. It was beautiful. We could see across the straits to Indonesia. And all of a sudden, a bee landed on my good friend's shoulder, and he just went with instinct like that, killed the bee. Within seconds, we were enveloped in bees, and it was stinging. It's just absolutely dreadful. And we ran down that hill. As soon as we passed through the stones, they were gone. So we went back up the hill, and my friend had just evaporated into air. So that's the kind of thing that the Peace Corps gave me, these kinds of insights in being able to live among the people, even though it was, not part of my duty, but it was one of the things I felt I could do, and I helped that village often. Now my friend had been stung by the bees also, and he in panic fell down behind rocks and was sort of passed out when we came back up. But he did live. He went down the trail on the other side. We had sent search teams up for him the next day, but the day after that, he arrived back in his town. He had come all the way around the mountains and back to get home. So he was all right, but he learned his lesson. So, different kind of story than the rest of you have.
Yeah. Sounds a little bit like karma, I guess. Do you still speak any Malay?
Oh yes, I can speak. And Ni Hui Shuo Gu Yu. Do you speak Chinese?
I do, yes, a little bit. Yeah.
I studied Mandarin in Malaysia.
I can't really read the Mandarin, but when I lived there, I got decent at conversational. Gabby, what was the local language that you learned in Madagascar?
It was Malagasy, but there are several dialects. So for us, when we first got there during training, we all just learned standard Malagasy. And then once we found out our sites, that's when we learned the specific dialect. So for me, it was Betimasaraka, which was one of the dialects on the eastern coast.
And do you still speak it?
I do, yeah.
And you've kept it up and you meet people? And
yeah, I mean, thankfully, because, it's 2021 and we can communicate via Facebook.
Yes, of course.
And, Facebook Messenger is amazing. And thankfully, we can send credit to like my friends that are still back in Madagascar, my Malagasy friends. So we can communicate often and, FaceTime, which I'm so thankful for, especially since we had to leave so quickly and we didn't really get a chance to say goodbye to everyone. So it's really nice to be able to catch up with everyone. And
what would you say was the best part or best and worst part about your service, Gabby?
So by far the best part, and I tell this to everyone, is I guess for like Peace Corps cultural exchange part, for me, just building those solid relationships and really forming great friendships and really family was by far the best part of my experience. To this day, I have the best friends in the world from my community. And like my first host family, I mean, they're all just angels. Just the fact that they took us all in and were so patient with us. We really knew nothing. We didn't know how to cook for ourselves. We didn't know how to speak the language. We were lost, like completely lost. And it's so funny. I always think too, how we always say, like in the United States, it takes a village to raise, a child. Well, like we used to say in Madagascar, it takes a village to raise a Vaza, which is like a foreigner, because it's true. Like we're lost without them. So I appreciate the hospitality and the patience and them trusting me to come into their community and overall just being so kind to me and teaching me to speak their language, teaching me how to cook for myself, how to travel by myself. So yeah, just forming those really solid relationships. And I mean, my best friend lives in Madagascar. She has become my sister. Her family, her mom is my mom. Her dad is my dad. And I'm just very thankful for those relationships that I formed. For the hardest parts, I think that Peace Corps in general, as I'm sure we all know, is not as diverse as it could be. So I think for me in my stage of we were stage 52, there were 47 of us going in and only 5 of us were Black Americans. And this was a trend in Madagascar for the 52 stages before us. And so a lot of us going into our communities, the communities had no idea that Black Americans even existed. So me being in my community, I was the third volunteer, but the very first Black volunteer. And so I think overall, throughout the course of my experience as a volunteer in Madagascar, it was hard for not only me, but other Black volunteers to almost have to prove our Americanness, I guess you could say. Just because obviously people know Beyonce, Michael Jordan, Barack Obama, like those are the faces, the Black faces of America. But then other than that, I mean, for the most part, America in Madagascar is seen as white. So I think it was a really great opportunity to have those important conversations about what the United States really looks like and the diversity in America. Because I mean, I think there's a lot of history that's lost, maybe. So yeah, I think it was a great opportunity for us as Black volunteers to really have open dialogues with our communities once we got good enough at the language and really have those teaching moments. But at the same time, I think it was very difficult for us overall to just constantly having to prove like, yes, I do speak English because, you know, I was born in the United States. And yes, my parents are also American because they were born in the United States. And this goes on for generations and generations. So I think that's the hardest part. But I think it was a learning experience for all of us. And something I can appreciate and take with me forward as I continue to travel and hopefully work abroad in other countries.
Do you think when you were evacuated, were you just did they kind of just COS you early, or do you still like have any? Can you go back?
I think. Well, we didn't technically COS early. We all got to ring the bell, but that was everyone. So it wasn't a really like special experience. I mean, technically, all of us are COS, but we didn't have a ceremony.
Yeah.
And I only had 2 months left, so I don't think they really even want us to go back. I think they just want people who were either like in a year or up to a year. And then a little bit before that, there was a stage that just came in before us and hadn't even sworn in yet. So I think those are the people that they would prefer to go back. For us, we were almost done. So I think it would be great for us just to say like our final goodbyes. But other than that, like our projects for the most part were almost done. So yeah,
that makes sense. Frances, what was the best and worst part about your service?
The best really for me was the feeling of the impact that the service had on me and the lasting friendships that I've had with people that are still in Jamaica and then other Peace Corps volunteers. I think that, I don't know if Peace Corps still has the motto, the toughest job you'll ever love, but that's what it was when I was there. And it wasn't easy because they throw you out in where you're going to be living, and you've been to training, and but then all of a sudden you're there and you're alone. And what is it you're going to do from day to day to day? But it was an incredible experience that I think is still with me to this day. One of my best friends we're still in very close to each other. And then another person that we were very close to when we were there died last year of brain cancer. Of course, with COVID, we couldn't have any kind of celebration for him. So, but his wife is organizing something, and we're going to have a little mini reunion. And we've had several reunions. I just feel that the connectiveness has been there, and then it's gone on in my life as well. Whether it's that time when I went back to Jamaica, and I could see that they were still putting the posters up in the clinics, just as we had done the 10 years before when I was there, that the that sense that there was a connection between you and the people there, and then the connection that it's taken to me in my service really throughout the rest of my life, because I sought out experiences like that. My husband, we lived in Cameroon for a year and a half when he was doing work on his PhD in soils. And then we were going to be working and living in Zaire, and had moved to Kinshasa. Of course, that didn't last long because we were evacuated when the military revolted. And then we lived in Dakar, Senegal for 4 years. And in each of those places, of course, not in Zaire, but in Cameroon and in Senegal, there were the volunteers that you meet. It's as though it becomes part of your vernacular as a human being. It's so intertwined into who you are. And I think it really is I felt as though it was a gift given to me. One of the things I'm the most happy I've ever done, that and our daughter. But the hardest part was the fact that it was very violent, because 1979 to 1981 is when there was a big election going on. And there was an awful lot of violence. There still to this day is a lot of violence in Jamaica. And we were always accused as volunteers of being agents of the CIA. It was very typical. I don't know if you guys encountered that to this when you were there, but people would point and go CIA, CIA. So, and the violence was very hard, very hard.
I don't know that I was ever accused of being CIA, but I think in China, we as volunteers, we're definitely kept track of. Blair, what was the best and hardest part about Ghana?
Yeah, I think in terms of the best part, it's probably similar to what everyone has said. Yeah, more so than any project or any like tangible thing I did, it really was like that relationship building. And like I just remember every so often we would have like trainings with like our community counterparts and like other Peace Corps volunteers, and those were I just have very fond memories of those because it was like 20 Ghanaians and 20 Americans. Like it was very we were kind of like out of the community, so we were all able to sort of like, I don't know, just like bond and sort of like let loose in a more like casual environment. And I don't know, it's like those are just moments where I'm like, dang, that was so cool. And like, we all got along so well. And it was always just like a lot of fun. Everyone was dancing and just like, Ghanaians got to meet other Ghanaians, Americans got to meet other people's counterparts. And so it was just kind of like a cool little like blend of people. Yeah. And the memories that I keep with me now are definitely like, my friends that I keep in touch with. And I know it's a lot easier to do with like WhatsApping and also like using, FaceTime, Facebook, Messenger, stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I imagine I'll keep in touch with like, especially, like the handful of closer friends I made for a very long time. And I would like to go back one day to visit. Like if I don't know, like if I have a family one day, I would love to like bring my family there. And so that all feels like very real to me. And I think, the challenges. Yeah. I think the first two things that come to mind, I think particularly the first one for me was like being very aware and sort of critical of like my role there, especially like where I was stationed as like a white American in Ghana, kind of like what that means, what my presence means, what types of structures or systems am I perpetuating, even if I'm trying to like actively think about things like white savior complex or whatever it might be. I think I was lucky that I had a cohort that like thought about these things a lot. And so I think that was kind of like always in the back of my mind, like what does my presence here mean? So I think that would be the first kind of necessary challenge. And I think the second one would be like just understanding that like even after 2 years, it's like I didn't know anything. Like I mean, I tried to know the language. I did my best to learn. I did my best to integrate. But like at the end of the day, I'm still very much an outsider. And like that's okay. I mean, I'm not Ghanaian, obviously, and I am who I am. And so just kind of understanding like in conversations or in like meetings or in even after the end of my 2 years, I was like, wow, I missed that, or like I didn't understand that, or like what just happened. And so I think, yeah, that was another challenge of just like understanding that I have a lot of blind spots and a lot of things that I just like will never understand, and that's okay. But I think just like being aware of those things and yeah, and just kind of like rolling with it, understanding like that not everything is like, I don't need to like have especially in my community, it's like not everything is about me, not everything is for me. So kind of like knowing my place a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you articulated really well something that I think most volunteers struggle with during one part of our service or another, or maybe the whole time. So thank you for putting that so eloquently. Excuse me. We're getting to the end of we're going to be wrapping up soon. So my last question is going to be a quick two-parter. Assuming you would do the Peace Corps again, but you couldn't go back to your country, where would it be? And one quick piece of advice for anybody in high school, like some of our current students, what would be one piece of advice you could give them? So first question is, if you could go back to, or assuming that you would go back and serve in the Peace Corps again, what country would you go to? And that's not your own. And then a quick piece of advice for some of our wild kids. Let's start with you, Gabby.
All right. So I think I would probably want to go to either Mozambique or Peru. But I think that every country sounds like it'd be amazing, but I think those two, I think I would really appreciate. And then for future volunteers, I think that when choosing to apply, just to be extremely intentional about your role and what you're looking for in your experience. Be intentional and pay attention to the privilege that you have going forth as a volunteer. I think that as all of us as Americans have a lot of privilege, and it's important to be very intentional about the way that we portray that and really understanding how we as volunteers can either use that in a good way or a bad way. So by that, I mean the way that we treat our fellow community members, the way that we are allies or advocate for our community members and for other volunteers. I think that we all have different mindsets when going in as a volunteer and expectations, but to really just trust the process, trust that hopefully you're there for the right reasons and that you're trying to have a great impact. Trust that your community members will be helpful and trust you to help build sustainable projects, and trust that Peace Corps as an entity will also be there to be sustainable and to help these communities as best as they can. And I think it's also really important to pay attention to who is gaining the most from the experience. I think all of us gain a lot as volunteers, but it's also really important to pay attention to what our communities are gaining and making sure that there's an equal balance in, who is receiving the most resources and who's gaining the most out of the experience.
Thank you. Frances, what about you?
I think if I had to choose, if I were able to be a volunteer again, I would go back to either Senegal or Cameroon. Not that I served there as a volunteer, but I lived there. And I just found that they left a huge impression on me. I loved living there. I enjoyed it very much. And I think it would be wonderful to be able to go back to either one of those countries as a volunteer. My advice that I would give to somebody that was thinking about becoming a Peace Corps volunteer would be to talk to other people who have been volunteers, because I think that you really learn a lot when you talk to other people that have been volunteers, because they share their experiences and help you become aware of, like what Gabrielle said, what is your intention of going? What is it that you hope to get when you're there? And understanding that what reasons you are going to that country, why do you want to be a volunteer, and what you are hoping that it will help you with in your life, and what is it that your intentions are that you are going to do there as a volunteer. And I think that sometimes when you talk with other volunteers, it helps you to gain that perspective. I know that once I had made my decision to become a volunteer, I had a friend of mine had, I was living in Manhattan Beach at the time. And I was living on a sailboat because I was getting ready to go. So I didn't have a place. Some friend had a boat, so I was living on a sailboat. But anyway, some friends had organized this dinner party, and it was all Peace Corps volunteers. And they grilled me. They were just, okay, why are you going? What is it that you want? This is what you can expect. And I think I took that with me, as they were just like very helpful. And I'm glad that my husband and I have been able to inspire other young people to go and be Peace Corps volunteers.
Great, thanks. Blair, what about you?
Yeah, so I think if I were to serve again, it would probably maybe somewhere in like Central or South America. I'm not really sure like the basis for that for that answer. Although I would be really interested in like learning Spanish. And I just know some people that have served there, so purely going off of those reasons. Though I do feel like anywhere is like what you make of it. And I think, yeah, I think the advice said is pretty much what I would say. Yeah, just like analyzing, yeah, like maybe why you're joining and what you hope to get out of it. And I think also maybe doing some like background research. I know now Peace Corps has made it a lot easier you can sort of pick where you get to go. And so I think putting some thought into like where you might want to serve and why, and then doing some research on the country. And also definitely, yeah, talking to volunteers that have served. And because people, volunteers have a lot of different, everyone kind of has their own experience. So there's a lot of different, things that you could learn from talking to previous volunteers. So I think that's always very valuable. Yeah.
Okay. And you, Jay, where would you go, and what is one piece of advice?
Well, I loved my experience very much. Came back to Chicago and worked for a big architectural firm and got my internship done there and started designing buildings. And I got the wanderlust again. I wanted to go back overseas. And I started looking around, and I wrote an article about teaching in Malaysia, and it was paired with an article about teaching in Iraq. And I wrote the guy, and I said that was very interesting, and like to compare notes with you. He wrote back and said, well, I can tell you all about it. It was a great experience being in Baghdad. And he said, there's a group going over. Would you like to see if you want to qualify for going to Baghdad to teach architecture? I said, sure. And was invited to join a program, Fulbright visiting of professors. 23 of us went to Baghdad and taught at universities there. And it was quite a change, but I got to learn how to design housing for the dry tropical climates, which is quite different than the moist tropical countries. So I now became an expert in design for all tropical climates, which was fun. Taught architecture third year again, and traveled the country widely. We were the only Americans that could do that. The embassy was restrained to be only within Kuala Lumpur.
That's quite quite experience. Very
Bouncing
very cool.
back and forth.
Yeah,
Yes.
very
Stepping up the ladder as I did. The Peace Corps let me do that. No one else could have that kind of luck.
Well, switching gears just a little bit before we close it up, quickly, Beardsley, Bacon, Michael, or Boltwood here at ETHS, and where was your which one of those four, and where did you eat lunch off campus? Where did you hang out back when you were a student here at ETHS? Or north, south, east, or west? For the
Me?
Whoever wants to, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was south, and we didn't eat off campus.
Where is there?
None of that. But
where did you hang out in Evanston?
But I will say that our basketball team won Best in State in 1968, and thanks to Facebook, and we now have a Facebook page of all of us from that year. And we had a reunion a couple years ago that was fantastic. It was one. I have inspired so many people. It was the best reunion you could ever have. It was 4 days long. I mean, they had planned it so well. It wasn't just like a dance and a dinner or something like that. We connected. We had dinner in Harms Woods, and we had bicycle tours and architectural tours, and we were at the school and we had tours of the school. It was great. So
that's great.
But I moved away from Evanston after high school, and I've only been back to see relatives because I still have relatives in the area.
What about you, Gabby?
Well, I ate at all of the lunch rooms and all of the wings. I'm not sure, but was it separate before? Like, were only certain grade levels allowed? Okay, so for us, it wasn't like that. We had classes in every single wing, except for lunch. I'm trying to think. I think like freshman and sophomore lunch was separate and was in different lunch rooms. But other than that, like, it was just free for all. Everyone was everywhere. And then for off campus, I would just go to like Potbelly. Potbelly for the most part. Other than that, yeah. I don't know. I mostly just ate at school.
Yeah. What about you, Jay?
May I ask, Gabby, where are you now?
I'm currently in Rogers Park, so very close to Evanston. But I grew up in Evanston, then went away for college, went to California, and then Peace Corps, and now I'm back here.
Okay. And have you been working since you came back from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I work for North Shore, so front lines, pandemic. It's been interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's been
I
an
asked that
adventure.
I asked that because I was curious what other people did, because I found that I went back to school when I was, how old was I? Maybe 38 to get my master's. And, but I found that in environmental planning, but I found that took me into, when I was in Senegal, that took me to working with a nonprofit, and that's where I found my passion. And so I have worked with nonprofits ever since then. So I think that's another thing Peace Corps does. That desire to give back and help stays with you.
Yeah, I'm applying to grad school right now, but after the pandemic, it was just kind of everything was up in the air. So I knew I needed a job, and I love healthcare, so it was kind of the perfect fit.
Great. Last but not least, Jay, where did you hang out? Where did you go for lunch off campus, or Beardsley, Bacon, Michael, or Boltwood, north, south, east, or west?
I didn't eat off campus at all. I never, there were the typical places that we all went and had our root beers and so forth, but in town. But the thing about being at the high school in that period of time changed my career. I took one elective course that absolutely diverted me into this stream that I've been in. It was a course called The Great Arts, and it was an elective. And we did sculpture, and we did painting, and we did weaving, and then we got to architecture. And I was always going to study science and technology, and this just fascinated me. I never thought I could make a living at it, and I looked at it more carefully, and I thought, yeah, you could do all right.
That's great.
So I decided I'd study architecture, and I went to my father. I was always going to go to MIT and study science and math. And I said, I want to study architecture at MIT. He said, no, if you want to study architecture, you go to the south side of Chicago, where Mies van der Rohe was teaching. And I studied architecture under the programs of Mies van der Rohe, which opened all kinds of doors in my career, all because I took this one course. And it was a remarkable thing. It led me on this great journey. And the person that got me into the Peace Corps was when we finished in 1960, we had finished our Bachelor of Architecture, and one of the other students was joining the Peace Corps. He was one of the first Peace Corps volunteers, and he told me about it. So I went to MIT to study for my master's and took this course in housing, design of housing. So Evanston led me directly on that path, which was wonderful. I have lots to thank the high school for that. I went back to my 50th reunion, and it was wonderful getting together with everyone.
Well, that's really cool. That's great to hear, and I think that's an excellent place to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for your time. This was great. I love hearing different people's experiences with the Peace Corps, and I'm sure you can all relate to that and how we have different but the same in a lot of ways. And it's been a pleasure to hear all of your experiences. So thank you very much.
As always, I am just sitting in awe after listening to a group of our alumni talk about their experiences. The ability to connect to people is one of the things that we strive for at Evanston Township High School. And I think we've heard a number of people tell us how that experience helped them both in their Peace Corps experience and then throughout their lives. Thanks to Francis, Jay, Gabby, Blair, and especially Karen Jones from our office. It's been a worthwhile hour to learn a little bit more about another segment of life where our alumni have been. In July, we're going to the Olympics. I'm still working on the assumption that the Olympics are going to happen in Tokyo. We're going to talk with ETHS Olympians about their experience, and we will see you next month when we bring together the next episode of Coming Together. Thank you.